Kilkeel is nothing but two rivers and a hill. That's all it is, or at least that's all it was in 1000 AD. Right? And even back then, sort of in around the 1100s, they started talking about Kilkeel having a significance in the area. And the significance in the area, nobody lived here. Nobody lived here, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But it had a significance, and so much so that even in the 1100s it was referred to as the Kingdom of Mourne, or the capital of Mourne. But Mourne, the word Mourne hadn't come into effect at that stage, and didn't come into sort of the mid-1200s, but it was still known as the capital of the area. So the river you're beside at the minute is the Little Kilkeel River, one of two rivers, and probably the most significant one for why the town eventually ended up being established where it is. But you'll see that as we walk on. So we really owe the existence of any importance to this area at all to a name you might know, John de Courcy. All right, so John de Courcy came through here in 1177. Didn't really stop to blink at Kilkeel because he was going to one place and one place only, and that was Greencastle. Started life in the 1800s as a hotel, and I'll just wait till this lorry passes us. The hotel was financed by a guy called Klondike Rooney, which is a pretty unusual name for the Kilkeel direction, the area, I'll give you that. Klondike was the son of a local guy who went over to America to pan for gold and to look for gold in the gold rush. And he named his son Klondike after the river where he was looking for the gold. So Klondike came back here, opened up the Royal Hotel, and the Royal Hotel, it went for many, many years until it finally closed down, and then it was a police station for a period of time. So this would have been Kilkeel Police Station up until they built a new one. It then caught fire. The police then moved from there, and then it's, like I said, it's been restored and been many, many buildings. But I just love the ornateness of what would have been sort of the balcony at the time, and that was the style that it was brought back from America at that time. So every time I drive past, I think, well, you know, it's nice to have that memory there because it does just take you back. So, like I said, the church, built in the 1300s, it was what formulated Kilkeel. So its name, whenever it was first built, was Kilkeel, from the Gaelic, and it basically means the Church of the Narrows. So, and what it means with the Church of Narrows is it's positioned between the two rivers, the Kilkeel River, the Little Kilkeel River, and the Aughrim River that flows into the harbour just out the road a little bit behind us. So that's why. And if you look at it strategically, it kind of makes sense. It's at the top of the hill. If you're wanting to defend yourself, this would be the way to go. And if you actually look around the outskirts, although with a lot of the new builds, these houses just went up in the last couple of years. Before that, it was much more evident. There's actually a rath. So you're on top of a hill with a rath. And in 1860, the last person who followed the tradition that had been here from the 1100s was followed, in that every body that was buried in this area was carried around the rath 3 times before it was buried. So they stopped that in 1860. And again, the Connemara and Retriever graves over there. Interestingly enough, with the Connemara and Retriever grave, a lot of the people could be named, but the ones that couldn't are in the mass grave. So they don't know who they are because they couldn't have opinion. And because the disaster was right along the coast, they hadn't the resources to get the bodies. So it was the locals were paid 1 shilling if they recovered a body and brought it here to be buried. The captain of the Retriever is actually buried out in Mansforth because they were able to identify him because of the clothes he was wearing. But most people, it wasn't the water that got them, it was the boilers and the boats exploding that caused the disfigurement of the bodies. So here's one of the things I'd heard that this graveyard had a mort cage on one of the graves, and that got me interested because mort, obviously French for dead, you know. Basically back in the day there was a lot of rumours going around about body snatchers and grave robbers, and I suppose the country towns, if you had a bit of money, you're worried about getting your grave robbed. So there was a grave in here. It was a family grave. It was a family with 2 young kids. Not sure what happened to them, there's no records of that, but they were buried and a mort cage went over them. And what sparked their fear was, if I said the name Burke and Hare, would that mean anything to you? I alluded at the start, the Kilkeel owes its presence to 2 or 3 really, really influential people and 2 or 3 major events. The event that's seen the population grow. Now, Kilkeel, I told you earlier on, capital of Mourne's with nobody in it, you know, and you've got to ask the question, why? Well, 2 rivers, a hill, and vegetation. And if you know the layout of the land, you'll know as you head that direction, you start to head towards the Mournes, and the whole lot would have been wooded. The lowlands here probably was fairly hard ground. If ever you go to Mourne Park, you'll see the glacial deposits. We know this was the path in the 10,000 years ago with the Ice Age, where the moorns was cut out and the deposits pushed towards the sea. So the land wasn't very arable. So you really did eke out a living here. 1200, after de Courcy came, the Irish clans who really did rule the roost decided they'd had enough. And there was a clan from Monaghan called the McMahons, and they came and they scalped the Anglo Normans and sent them on their way and took over this whole area. This was the area that they wanted. And that really seen a period of time. Yes, Edward de Bruce came over and tried to claim tried to fight the English and tried to claim it back for Scotland and all sorts, but nobody really got a handle of the Irish clans at this stage, and they became stronger and stronger. And one of the reasons that you couldn't really fight them is they were people of the land. They practiced a thing called bullion, and in the Mourns, bullion is where you drive your cattle to the lowlands in the winter and the highlands in the summer, so nobody knew where to go and get them. They were hardy people that could go up into the treed areas and live up in there. You did have a mix of people locally here who were probably the remnants of the Anglo-Normans from the castle, from Greencastle and stuff coming up here. And then you would have had some of the people sort of becoming accustomed to living in there. And we've seen a small population arise, but nothing worth of note, and nothing is recorded in any of the records until they decided that the Irish tribes or the Irish chieftains had to be sorted out. And we know of all the wars that there was to try to take that on, and how many English attempts there was at coming over. And then the Anglo-Irish alliances that was formed to fight off the invaders. So this area here has seen so many people that wanted the property grab that it's been unreal. I'm going to tell you about a guy, when we get up the hill a bit, I'm going to tell you about a guy who had a lot to do with the Scottish coming over, but really up until about the middle of the 1600s, 1700s, Kilkeel was tiny. There was very, very few people here. And so the reason they talk funny here is because there's not many of them indigenous. All right, so bear that in mind. There's not many of them indigenous. But then in the 1800s, we started to see more investment in there. I mean, if somebody says, what did Kilkeel live on? Well, there was the fishing, there was the agriculture, there was a little bit of stonework, there wasn't really much else until the 1800s. Family called Walmsley came over from England, and they seen the opportunity to open mills. They opened a flax mill, they opened bleaching greens, and they opened corn mills as well, and that's seen the industry kick off. The harbour was established in 1850. 1860 seen the first quay get in, and that's seen heavy industry coming in to build boats, to manage boats, and the fishing industry to go through the roof. And Kilkeel then became a market town, and that's why the layout with the carts and the stone buildings was able to really generate itself. The market was just where you're parked. That is the original market square. It then moved over a period of time up the hill to where you're going for your tea in a little while. But originally it was there. So this was a market town based on the river. The problem was you had to go up a hill to get out of it in either direction. So, in three directions actually, when you'll see that whenever we go up here. So it wasn't an easy market town, which meant the markets were kind of funny. You'd have had your flax market, your oat market, and your living pig market, but then the heavier stuff would have been once a month rather than once a week. And that was simply because of the journeys people had to make. So we did see those industries coming in, and obviously when you start industries, you start wealth, you start generating work, and you start to generate a population. So that's really when Kilkeel kicked off in about the 1800s. But again, there's big people behind that. So that was the Walmsley family come in, but they come in at the behest and the permission of a family called the Kilmories, and we'll talk more about them in a minute. This always reminds me of the American troops here. So the mountain behind me is Binion, or Big Nyin, as it's known locally, and you can see wee Binion in front of us and then Big Binion behind. And when the Americans were coming here, it was the only mountain that they actually recognised, but they didn't call it Binion. As they were flying in their planes, looking for markers of where to go, they always looked out for what they call Convoy Mountain, because they say that it looks like big lorries driving over a hill. I brought you to the graveyard here because there's two characters that I need to introduce you to. Isn't it desperate that when you want to know the history of a place, you've got to speak to the dead, isn't it? But it's true. It's true. I told you there was big characters in Mourns. So the first grave that we're going to go down to is the family grave of the Kilmories. There was 12 viscounts of Kilmory, and then 6 earls. But the 12th Viscount became the first earl. Whatever way, it seems to be a promotion that you get for something in battle or something in a family connection. They came from Shavingston in Shropshire, family seat in England, but eventually, come about the second Earl of Kilmorey, they decided that Mourne was their family home, so they sold up in England and came and lived here. And it was really about that time that they massively started to influence what was happening in Kilkeel. The nicest stories that shows how they connected with the community was when they were travelling in from Mourne Park to the church each Sunday. They would have passed an old lady that was making her way, and every single Sunday Lord Kilmorey stopped the carriage, put her in the seat and walked beside the carriage to church so that she could get coming. So it just showed the sort of effect that they had in the community. But we're going to go down and see this other one. This grave here is of a guy called Francis Rowsley Chesney. Now that name may or may not mean something to you. His father, who we'll meet very shortly, was fought in the American War of Independence. Picked the wrong side. I had to come back here broke. And we'll talk about his story. But this is his son. And his son, like any sort of family that wanted a son to do well, sent him off to military school. He went to Sandhurst. He became a British soldier or a British officer. He went off. He was in the expeditionary force. And he had when he was in an Egypt type direction, he reckoned that it was possible for ships to navigate across land. And he is the man who surveyed and wrote the plans for the Suez Canal. All right. So he went to the British Army and he went, we could build a canal through there and connect those two pieces of land. And they went, nah. So he went to France and they went, you're on. So France built it, and they awarded him Grandfather of the Suez Canal Award, and they gave him the highest award of freemanship in France. And then he went, I reckon you could do the same in India. And Alaska's looking pretty good too. So he did. He went out and did more expeditionary work and led the grounds work for a lot of the big endeavours that were made to make canals. But he is the grandfather of the Suez Canal, and yet here he is in Mourne. Here he is in Mourne. They had a family home just outside the town, and again, big contributors to the town. He's buried here with one of his young sons and his wife. Now, the reason it's really interesting, it's not that he just built the Suez Canal, or just, that's not the big story. The big story for me is, why is there a kink in the wall? Is the cross that good that they had to build the wall around it? Because if I asked what sort of a cross it is, you'd tell me it's a Celtic cross. But it's not, because it's too ornate to be a Celtic cross. Anybody know what HIS stands for? And internationally, it is, in Arabic as well, it means Jesus Christ. So it is of the Christian faith. The ornateness would suggest that it's not truly from these lands, and it was actually a gift from Egypt. But the problem with that is, we're not sure if they're Church of Ireland Egypt or not. So they're not going on consecrated ground. So the cross couldn't go on consecrated ground just because of what he did. No, it was all great stuff. But this is the reason I'm here. This sundial. So I did tell you there was a real reason why people came here and why people talk funny here. So in the late 1600s, going into the 1700s, this area was still very much in the hands of the Irish, and every time they drove them out, they come back. It was almost like they lived here or something. And the English just couldn't work out what they were going to do with them. And then there was a guy called Captain Henry Hunter. Now that name probably means very little to you because he's not that well known, although he should be. He absolutely should be. He would have been the right-hand man of the Duke of Schomberg. Starting to see the picture here. He fought in the Break of Killyleagh, he fought in Donaghadee, he fought in the Battle of Boyne, he fought in the Siege of Derry, and he showed himself to be a good lieutenant to the senior people, and they decided to award him. They decided that man needs a bit of recognition. So what they did was they gave him lands around this area. Right? He became the biggest land renter in the area, allowed to take on his own tenants, which was a massive thing at that stage. And he then thought, well, why do you want me to do this? And they said, because we want you to keep the Irish out. And he went, but there's not enough people to put on the land to keep the Irish out. So he went to Scotland and he recruited an army. So the Kilkeel Scots who came here were asked to come here, not as part of the partition, but to be a plantation of people separate to the actual plantation. Because if you think about it, the plantation didn't actually come down Antrim and down. It was round the other parts of it. It didn't come down here. So this was really unique. The Ulster Scots, if you look at where they're dotted around, Kilkeel's a pocket. You'll drive through Kilkeel and know there's more to it than that. And thank you for sticking with me.
Thank you.